to the ITSM Practice Podcast.
Welcome to the ITSM Practice Podcast. I'm Luigi Ferri. Today I want to talk about a framework that many people have heard about, very few truly understand, and almost nobody outside the defense takes seriously enough. The Department of Defense Architecture Framework, originally created by the United States Department of Defense. At the first glance, it sounds like something distant from enterprise IT. Military, government, procurement heavy, probably full of diagrams and bureaucracy. But I think that interpretation misses the real point entirely. Because the reason this framework exists is actually very simple. At a certain level of complexity, organizations stop being able to coordinate systems informally. And that is exactly where many enterprises are heading now. The core idea behind the framework is visibility. The framework was designed because defense environments became too interconnected, too distributed, and too operationally dependent to manage through intuition alone. Different systems, different organizations, different vendors, different operational responsibilities, all interacting continuously. And eventually, the Department of Defense realized something critical. You cannot secure, govern, or modernize what you cannot architecturally describe. That sentence matters far beyond defense, because modern enterprises are starting to face the same coordination problem. Now let me explain what the framework actually does. The framework tries to describe a complex environment from multiple perspectives simultaneously. Not only the technology, that is the important part. It looks at how operations function, how systems interact, how services exchange information, how capabilities evolve over time, which standards constrain the ecosystem, and how projects, dependencies, and organizational responsibilities connect together. In other words, it tries to describe how the environment actually behaves as a system, not as isolated components. That distinction is fundamental, because most enterprises still think operationally in silos: infrastructure, cloud, security, applications, service management, vendors, etc. But complex environments do not behave in silos anymore. They behave like ecosystems, and ecosystems create coordination problems. This is where I think the framework becomes extremely relevant for managed service providers, especially providers working in large enterprises or government-related environments. Many managed service providers inherit environments where nobody truly owns the architecture anymore, and that usually happens slowly. A tender changes the infrastructure provider. Another vendor manages the cloud platform. Another organization operates security tooling. Then applications move to software as a service platforms. Then integrations are outsourced. Then a transformation program introduces new APIs and automation layers. 5 years later, nobody fully understands the end-to-end environment anymore. The organization still operates, but architectural ownership quietly disappeared. What remains is accumulated complexity. And this is the part many executives underestimate. Cloud abstraction did not remove complexity. It redistributed it invisibly. This is why modern outages and operational failure increasingly behave differently than they did 15 years ago. Complex systems rarely fail inside components. They fail between assumptions. And integration behaves differently than expected. A dependency nobody documented becomes critical. A platform team changes something without understanding downstream operational consequences. An identity provider impacts applications nobody associated with it. Everything works individually, yet the environment fails collectively. That is architectural problem, not simply a technical one. And frameworks, like the Department of Defense Architecture Framework, were specifically designed to reduce this kind of systemic opacity. One of the most interesting aspects of the framework is how it forces organizations to observe the same environment through different perspectives. There is an operational perspective. What is the organization trying to achieve? There is a system interaction perspective, which systems exchange information and depend on each other. There is a service perspective, which capabilities are exposed as services across the ecosystem. There is a standard perspective, which technical and governance constraints shape interoperability. And there is also a capability perspective. How do organizational capabilities evolve over time? That is important because large environments are not static. They evolve continuously. And every transformation introduces new dependencies. This is where I think many enterprises are currently struggling. Organizations modernize faster than they understand themselves. Cloud accelerated this problem dramatically because abstraction creates psychological distance from complexity. You no longer see servers. You no longer see infrastructure. You no longer see network boundaries directly. Everything becomes service-based, programmable, abstract, distributed. It feels simpler, but underneath, dependency complexity often increases massively. And many organizations are now operating environments where no single team understands the complete architecture anymore. That should concern leaders much more than it currently does. The Department of Defense discovered this problem earlier than enterprises did because military operations cannot tolerate uncontrolled interoperability failure. If systems do not coordinate properly, missions fail. The pressure forces architectural discipline. Modern enterprises are now starting to experience similar coordination problems, not because they are military organizations, because digital businesses itself became systemically interconnected. And that is why I believe this framework matters more today than many people realize. DoDAF was designed for defense environment, but modern enterprises are starting to face similar coordination problems. And this is also why architecture is becoming strategic again. Not theoretical, strategic. Because once environments become sufficiently interconnected, architecture stops being documentation. It becomes operational intelligence. It becomes governance. It becomes organizational visibility. The framework itself is not magic. I will not automatically simplify complexity. But it forces organizations to confront something not comfortable. Do we actually understand how our environment behaves end-to-end? Many organizations discover the answer only during outages, incidents, migrations, or transformations failures. Usually too late. For managed service providers, this creates a very important shift. The role is no longer only operating systems, maintaining infrastructure, or delivering services. Increasingly, providers are expected to operate inside ecosystems of interconnected dependencies they did not design themselves. And that creates new responsibilities, not only technical responsibilities, architectural responsibilities. Because at the moment nobody owns the architecture, operational risk becomes systemic. So I think the real value of a framework like DoDAF is not military compliance. It is forcing organizations to think structurally about complexity before complexity becomes unmanageable. And I suspect many enterprises are already much closer to that threshold than they realize. especially after years of outsourcing cycles, provider transitions, cloud migration, software as a service expansion, platform integrations, and fragmented governance models. So before your organization launches another transformation initiative, another cloud migration, or another vendor transition, maybe ask a more uncomfortable question. Has architectural accountability already fragmented inside the organization? Because if nobody truly owns the architecture anymore, eventually nobody fully understands the operational consequences either. And that is usually where systemic risk begins. Thank you for listening. I'm Luigi Ferri, and this was the ITSM Practice Podcast. Arrivederci.